This is Carolina Ghost Towns, a podcast about the vanished towns and lost communities in South Carolina, North Carolina, and maybe a few other places. I'm your host, Tom Taylor. I've heard it said that there's a Greenville in every state, but the one in Tennessee is the only one spelled with an extra E. Being me, I couldn't take this at face value. Wikipedia lists 36 cities across the nation with the name Greenville. I thought that maybe the aphorism could be expanded to simple geographic names. I dug into the GeoNames database and found that it's just not the case. As far as I could tell, there's not a Greenville in every state, regardless of type. I did find that the Greenville in Tennessee is the only city with an extra E. Duplicate names for cities can cause problems. I remember one consultant who was supposed to come to Greenville, South Carolina, but booked a flight to Greenville, North Carolina instead, which is a 5-hour drive away. He had to rent a car and make a long drive to make our meeting. The problem can be even more daunting for a researcher looking into historic communities. In previous episodes, I've mentioned how settlers like to name locations in the new colonies for their cities of origin. These were towns like Petersburg, Vienna, Lisbon, Hamburg, Dorchester, and Manchester, to name just a few. In old newspaper articles, even if you filter just for South Carolina results, you'll often get hits for older, more prominent place names rather than the one you wanted. It takes time to sort through this confusion, which is why I do these episodes only once every 2 weeks. I expect these problems when I'm researching a ghost town with the same name as a prominent European city, but not when I come across the same, less-known name. It's especially confusing when I come across 2 ghost towns in the same state with the same name. Today, we're exploring the ghost town of Willtown in Charleston County, South Carolina. In the next episode, we'll take a look at the ghost town of Willtown in Williamsburg County. The early settlement of the Carolina coast was fraught with conflict. Spanish and English settlers struggled for control of territory, along with regular skirmishes with the native tribes. The Spanish attempted a Carolina settlement at St. Helena, but it was the English who succeeded, first at Charleston, then Beaufort, and finally at Georgetown. Sometime around 1682, a group settled at the confluence of Penny Creek and the Edisto River. They decided to call their settlement London. The settlement was first mentioned in a report to the Surveyor General.
We understand that there is on Edisto River, about 20 miles above the head of Ashley River, a convenient fertile piece of land fit to build a town on 500 acres, of which we would have reserved for that use, and 11,500 more about it for a colony and it being above the salts and tides.
For whatever reason, the settlement was moved from its original location to a bluff overlooking the Edisto, about 3 miles south of Penny Creek. There, it was known as New London, either because it was a new location for the settlement, or like New York or New Jersey, or any of the other new settlements in the New World. There, the settlers laid out what was to be the second planned city in South Carolina after Charleston. According to Carolina.com, New London's plan called for 250 lots and 62 blocks, with 17 streets laid in a grid pattern. 4 acres each were reserved for a school and an Anglican church and parsonage. An acre each were planned for a market town and a town garden. At this time, South Carolina was under the control of the Lords Proprietors, English noblemen who had been granted titles to land in the Carolinas. These absentee landlords appointed governors, but exerted control over the colony. The area where New London was settled was named Colleton County for Sir John Colleton, one of the Lords Proprietors. Apparently, the Lords Proprietors weren't thrilled with Charleston as the major settlement. In 1685, they wrote to the colonial governor of, quote, being fully convinced that Charlestown is so situated that it must be always unhealthy in the hot months of the summer, and do think that the courts there held be adjourned from the 10th of June to the 10th of October, that men may not be obliged to come to so unhealthy a place, close quote. The proprietor suggested that during this time, court and governance take place at, quote, London or some other place near the head of the Ashley River, close quote. London, in this case, referred to New London on the Edisto. The proprietors really wanted New London to model the original city of that name. A 1980 archaeology survey of the region describes the layout of the lots and street names.
Many of those along the riverfront were laid out 8 to a block. Most of the remainder were grouped 4 to a block. Each square block contained 4 acres. The streets were 66 feet wide. The blocks, or squares as they were called, were named for well-known places in London. That is Covent Garden, St. James, Lincoln's Inn, and most of the streets had their London counterparts as well, no doubt to make the community seem more attractive to English settlers. There were 4 sets of stairs coinciding with 4 streets leading from the river up the bluff to the town. Most of the lots for which there are recorded grants lie in the first 2 rows of blocks along the river. None of those identified are farther east than the 3rd row. However, a 4-acre plot for a school was set aside in the 5th row from the river, and the square for the church and minister was in the 3rd row. Lot 75 was designated as the marketplace.
The survey goes on to say that by 1703, a road was built from Charleston to Willtown, and a ferry established across the Edisto River. In that year, the General Assembly authorized a road, quote, from the plantation of Thomas Rose, planter on the southwest side of the Ashley River, to the town in Colleton County called Willtown, close quote. Willtown was founded for 3 principal reasons: defense of the colony, development of a community of religious dissenters, and pursuit of the Indian trade. The earliest grants for town lots date to 1697, and there are the earliest records of the name Willtown. By 1704, the settlement was no longer called New London, but Willtown. Maps show both names in use throughout the 18th century. Eventually, Willtown won out. The 1708 Church Act established Willtown as the local center of government, as a polling place, court of common pleas, and magistrate court. The village flourished, but never became the New London that the proprietors envisioned. It served as a commerce hub for the surrounding plantations, shipping rice, indigo, and timber from the landing on the Edisto. A 2003 article in the Press and Standard states that, quote, by 1708, the settlement had grown to include shops, docks, and 2 churches. A ferry operated across the South Edisto River there, and later a stagecoach road from Charleston to Savannah went through the area, close quote. Other contemporary reports indicate that there were about 80 houses on the town lots. Things were not always peaceful in Willtown, though. In 1715, the Yamasee Indians attacked the village, so the town built earthen works to protect its citizens and formed its own militia with a garrison of about 50 men. In 1739, a group of slaves on the Stono River near Charleston led an uprising and began a march south toward Florida. The Willtown militia played a key role in suppressing the Stono Rebellion. During the Revolutionary War, the British destroyed houses and buildings in the area, and an important battle was fought at Parker's Ferry upstream on the Edisto. The biggest threat, though, was disease. In 1740, an epidemic of malaria hit Charleston, Willtown, and other villages along the coast. Many of the low-country planters moved further inland to higher ground, where there were fewer mosquitoes to spread the disease. By 1750, the Willtown Presbyterian Church was abandoned and rebuilt more centrally located to the plantations. Jacksonboro became the new seat of government for the district, and areas like the one that later became Summerville saw population increase. The Willtown Bluff overlooking the Edisto remained an important landmark, but eventually lost out as commerce moved to other cities such as Charleston and Beaufort. The post office, established in 1801, closed in 1824. Robert Mill's 1825 map of Colleton District shows that it was still an important site and river crossing. But by this time, the county seat had moved to Walterboro. A Bradstreet Company report indicates that there were still 2 stores in the village in 1875. A 1998 archaeological study by Drew Ruddy says that, quote, with the rice culture flourishing, the town began to atrophy, and the area was developed as plantation lands, close quote. The U.S. Civil War began in nearby Charleston, but Willtown saw action as well. The 1998 Ruddy report states that, quote, in 1863, Union gunboats ascended the Edisto in a raid which liberated more than 150 slaves from the area. During the raid, the small armed tug, Governor Milton, was grounded and burned near Willtown, close quote. As with so many towns, changes in transportation contributed to the decline of Willtown. The Charleston to Savannah Railroad ran further inland, bypassing the now rural community. Commercial river traffic declined, and the town lost its status as a port. By the early 20th century, Willtown was left with only a few residences and a landing on the Edisto. Today, nearly all vestiges of the colonial town of New London, or Willtown, are gone. Spanish moss-draped live oaks line the road down to the site. which is now on the National Register of Historic Places. The New Hope Plantation House, now known as Willtown Plantation, is the only remaining antebellum structure built in 1820. A single column from the old Willtown Presbyterian Church remains on the banks of the Edisto. Now, Willtown Bluff is a peaceful refuge overlooking the river, located in Charleston County. Large riverfront homes grace the area, and the land is privately owned. But it is surrounded by the Ace Basin National Wildlife Refuge. A few years ago, we had the chance to kayak this portion of the Edisto River. We launched on Penny Creek, the first site of the London settlement. All along the way, we encountered remnants of the rice plantation economy. There were canals and channels that led into the fields, with old wooden dikes and locks to control the flow of water. Halfway through our trip, we stopped for lunch at the site of an old rice mill where the husk was removed from the rice. A brick chimney was all that was left of the mill. Several of these chimneys loomed over the tidal waters of the Edisto along our way. We ended our trip at the Willtown Bluff Landing, with nice homes now overlooking one of the earliest settlements in the state. That does it for this episode of Carolina Ghost Towns. Next time, we take a look at another Willtown, this time in Williamsburg County, South Carolina. Until then, I put links to additional information in the show notes, including a layout of the colonial town, links to research used in this episode, and photos from our kayak trip. Please leave a comment, recommend the show to your friends, and as always, thank you for listening.
In this southern ghost town, we found a story untold. In the shadows of the past, we unravel, secrets unfold. With each step we take, we journey back in time. In this southern ghost town, we leave our footprints behind.
Thanks for listening. The opening music was composed by Lex FM with additional music from Pixabay. The song Southern Ghost Town was generated by Suno AI. All other music was composed and recorded by me, Tom Taylor. Carolina Ghost Towns is a part of the Random Connections empire. It's pretty much a one-man show, so I wear all the hats, including producer, writer, researcher, sound engineer, publicist, and bartender. If you like the show, please subscribe on your favorite pod venue and be sure to give us feedback. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for the show, you can reach me at carolinaghosttownspod@gmail.com. For more information and show notes, visit randomconnections.com. Thank you.
In this southern ghost town, we found a story untold. In the shadows of the past, we unravel, secrets unfold. With each step we take, we journey back in time. In this southern ghost town, we leave our footprints behind.